Can an average club triathlete take on the Celtman triathlon? Yes, I did, and so can you. Celtman is one of the toughest triathlons in the world. It comprises a 3.4 kilometre swim in cold water surrounded by millions of jellyfish. The bike ride is 120 hilly miles of cycling, usually into headwind, and the run is a marathon up and over a couple of mountains. This year's race was described by the organisers as having the worst conditions ever. Previously done 2 long distance triathlons, one in 2014, one in 2018, and now another in 2022. Basically, I treat long distance races like football World Cups. Great fun, but 4 years is enough time between them. So I'm not coming to this race as a complete novice, but I did come in the bottom third of both races, which means I was neither great or truly awful. I was probably slightly below average. Since my last long distance event, I've done a couple of standard distance events, but nothing major. I've also done very little cycling. I checked my Strava account, it said I averaged 500 miles of cycling a year. Celtman is 122 miles. I was basically doing 1/5 of my normal yearly average in one day. Biking is my weakest discipline, but I like to think that I'm an above average swimmer and runner. My swim time is 1 minute 40 per 100 metres, or 1 minute 30 if I try hard. I also enjoy outdoor swimming, and I don't really get bothered by cold water or waves. I average about 30 miles a week of running, and it's usually up hills and on trails, which means I'm not the quickest, but I'm pretty steady on hilly, traily courses. My key goal for training for this race was still to have a life outside of training. I'm a great believer that life comes first, training and races come second. But to ensure I had a good structure to my week and to remove the anxiety of knowing whether I was training enough, I decided to buy a Celtman training program. I got one from TMR Coaching. I'll put a link in the description below. The training plan advised 2 or 3 swims a week. I did 1. Swimming is my most time-consuming exercise. It involves at least an hour round trip from my house to the pool before I even go and have a swim. Thankfully, my swim technique is pretty good, so I decided all I really needed to do was work on my swim fitness. So I did 1 2.2k swim a week, and that was fine for me. I'm also pretty confident dealing with cold water, so I didn't feel the need to overly practice swimming in it. I did a couple of pre-swims just to remind myself what it would feel like. I felt cold. My view of swimming in triathlons is if you're not looking to win the race, then spend your time training the parts that will actually make a significant difference to your time. In my case, that's biking and running. The training plan had a lot of swimming on it, which I didn't do. So my first training tip, therefore, is to adjust the plan to reflect your ability, cut down the things you're good at so you can spend more time on the things you're not so good at. The key sessions for the bike were a shorter, faster set on a Tuesday and a longer bike ride at the weekend. I mostly used Zwift until about April. It was the most time efficient way to train, as I could do it in my house. If the plan said 1 hour, I'd go to the pre-designed training programs on Zwift and pick something that was about an hour long. I enjoyed the Norseman programs, so I mostly used them for any session. From April, I tried to do the longer bike ride outdoors, but I mostly did it on a mountain bike. Yes, a mountain bike. I don't enjoy long rides on my road bike. I find it very boring, so instead I'd head off on my mountain bike and find interesting roads and tracks to ride. It meant that I could find places such as this, which is the Glasgow Govan Docks. It appeared in the hit film 1917 as a German town. They built a small set and used the dock part for a key scene where the hero was getting shot at by a sniper. Thankfully, no one decided to shoot me on the day. I also maybe mistakenly thought that riding a mountain bike would be better for me as it's heavier and therefore would take more effort to ride. Therefore, on the day that I did use my road bike, it should surely feel easier. Surely. My longest pre-race ride was 6 hours, which I did a couple of times to ensure that I was used to being on a bike for a long period of time. It's also a chance just to check on nutrition. I only rode my road bike 3 times before Celtman, and that was just to check it still worked. Just to double check that, I paid for a full service of it just before the event. That ensured there was no mechanical issues on the day. The running schedule was a shorter, hillier run on a Thursday and a longer run at the weekend. I enjoy running, so this was easy enough to follow. It was actually slightly less running than I would normally do. The only issue was that I developed an Achilles injury at the start of April. This meant I chose to only run once a week. This was enough to keep my running fitness, but it was not enough to make my injury worse. I'd like to have done more running, but I think I made the correct decision just to ensure that I made it to the start line relatively injury-free. I started training at the start of January. Time-wise, the first 3 months were manageable. and it didn't get in the way of my life. The last 2 months were trickier as I had to work out how to get the long bike ride done. It usually meant I had to block off one day at the weekend, or if I finished work early on a Friday, I'd get it done then. The good thing about blocking off a day at the weekend was I could use it as an excuse not to have to cut my garden hedge. This is a task I dread as there's a lot of hedge to cut. But as soon as the race was done, first thing my wife did was hand me the hedge trimmer. Overall, my fitness increased steadily over 5 months. I couldn't have done more based on the time I had available and the desire to still have a life outside of training. If you want to check out the exact amount of time I spent doing each discipline, the information is on the Twinbikerun blog with a link in the description below. Extreme triathlons tend to take place in beautiful remote locations. Celtman is no exception. It takes place in Torridon, a tiny village enclosed by mountains and the sea. But there is a downside to this location. It can be very difficult to get accommodation near to the race start. So here's another top tip. I always book my accommodation before I get a confirmed place in the race. In fact, I book my accommodation as soon as the date becomes available for the race that I would like to do. This way I beat all the other people who are trying to find places to stay. Once I find out whether I get in the race, if I don't manage it, then I can just cancel the accommodation. It hasn't cost me anything. If you use a site like booking.com, they have lots of places that you can pre-book with no prepayment and allow cancellations. Using this method, I was able to sort out a house that was about 45 minutes from the start, which in this part of the world is actually pretty close. I'll put a link in the description below to the place I stayed at. It wasn't cheap, but nothing here is. But it was clean and it was comfy and it was a good base for the weekend. There was a local supermarket just 5 minutes away and they had a good choice of local foods and a selection of mainstream brands. I booked the accommodation from the Thursday to the Sunday of the race weekend. I headed up to it on the Thursday. I like to arrive 2 days beforehand. The Friday is not a big rush. My sport runner was going to be my brother Andrew. He was due up on the Thursday as well. Unfortunately, he phoned me just as I left to say that he'd come down with a stomach bug. This was a slight worry as you're not allowed to start the race if you have no support crew. I hoped it was one of those 24-hour bugs and thankfully he managed to turn up the next day. Here's another tip. I brought my own pillow with me. This is to ensure that I have a good night's sleep. I learned this when I saw an interview of a Tour de France rider who said he brought his own pillow as he never knew where he was going to sleep that night and he always wanted to make sure he was comfy. On the Friday, I went to the social swim. This is a small gathering in Shieldig where you can do a practice swim in the sea. The conditions were tough. It was a heavy wind and a lot of rain. There was big waves in the sea, so the organisers shortened the course. I quite enjoy swimming in waves, so I just went straight in and did a quick loop. The weather temperature wasn't too cold. It was 12.5 centigrade, and it boosted my confidence that I wouldn't have to worry about temperature the next day. In the afternoon, I had to register. They're very strict about the mandatory kit. One of the requirements is that you have a hat. I had a baseball cap with me, but they said it was not good enough to be a hat. Thankfully, my brother had turned up by this point and he had a spare beanie cap that he could lend me. I would argue that the baseball cap was better than the beanie, but it's the organisers who have the final say. What was slightly annoying though was, as soon as I registered and had the kit checked, they handed me a complimentary woolen hat. So what was the point of checking my hat? I asked them what most people get wrong with the kit check, and they replied, people bring toy whistles instead of proper whistles. So if you do go to the race, don't skimp on your whistle. After the kit check, I sat for an hour listening to the race briefing. There was no chair supplied for this, so by the end of it I had a very sore bum. This is why it's an extreme triathlon. Normal triathlons would supply a chair. After getting back to the accommodation, there was time for a last check of the kit and then a photo, just to prove I was there. I went to bed by 7:30 and I was hoping for a decent night's sleep. Race morning arrived and the alarm went off horribly early, 2:30 in the morning. I got up and ate a bowl of crunchy nut cornflakes before changing into my wetsuit. I'd packed the car the night before, so there was nothing to do in the morning other than drive to the start. We arrived in Shieldig around 3:30. I racked my bike and picked up my dibber and GPS unit. Shieldig is a very long town, so give yourself plenty of time to walk the length of it. There was a lot of people about and there was a good race atmosphere building. A bus takes all the swimmers to start. A man sat next to me on the bus. He started talking and discovered that he knew who I was. He'd read my brother and I's blog. He didn't ask for my autograph though. It's only taken 8 years of writing a blog before someone's finally admitted to reading it. There was a bit of hanging around when we got to the swim start. There was a band playing some music and some fires were lit, but I'd rather just go on with it. If you look at this photo, I'm the one running towards the cameraman. It looks like I'm trying to escape from the race before it's even begun. I entered the water towards the back of the field. This was deliberately, I was trying to limit the amount of time in the sea before the swim started. The temperature was still 13 degrees. Normally I wouldn't bother with vest, gloves and socks at that temperature, but I didn't want to take any chances of getting cold, so I wore everything. I quickly got into my rhythm and focused on staying relaxed and tried to breathe every couple of strokes and sighted every 30 seconds or so. Up until the second island, I saw the occasional jellyfish and I wondered what all the fuss was about with the jellyfish, and then I came to the second island. I'd never seen so many jellyfish in my life. It was like swimming into a wall of jellyfish. Every stroke that I did would have resulted in me punching a jellyfish out of the way. This lasted all the way until I came out the water. At this point, my brother met me and gave me a hand getting out. I checked my time and I'd done it in about 68 minutes, which is fine. I was hoping for about 70 minutes. I didn't feel cold at all, which was great, so proof that the extra layers worked. And as soon as I got out, my brother handed me a can of Pepsi, so I got a nice sugary hit before starting on the bike leg. The forecast for the bike leg was wet, windy and sunny, a typical Scottish weather system. Couldn't make up its mind what it wanted to be. I was straight uphill from Shieldig onto the main road. Thankfully I'd left my bike in transition set to low gear so that I was able to get up with no trouble, but quite a few people hadn't, and you could hear the sound of gears clanking and competitors muttering FFS whilst trying to get up the hill. The first section was nice. It was slightly uphill, there was a nice tailwind. The route went through Tordon Valley, which was very pretty. I felt good. I was using a road bike. I had brought my TT bike with me and I had been intending to use it, but due to the forecast of it being so windy, I decided to play safe and just use the road bike instead. I think I was probably one of only about 3 people who used a road bike with no tri-bars on it whatsoever. This did mean that I was probably much slower than I could have been, but it also meant that I was quite comfy and I was quite happy with my choice. A few competitors came flying past me on the early stages of the bike course before I settled into a group who I would see on and off for the next 100k. My brother had gone back to the house because his wife and daughter had come up with him and he wanted to pick them up as well. So I knew it would be about 4 hours into the bike before I saw him again. I was okay with that as I'd packed enough water and food to last. Section down past Loch Marie was straightforward. A few wee climbs and a few bits of headwind, but nothing too bad. The only issue was when I reached a narrow bit of road and discovered it was blocked. A supporter's vehicle and bus had got stuck. I used it as an opportunity to drink and eat whilst they tried to sort it out, which was tricky as the bus driver only spoke German and the other driver only spoke a very, very gruff Scottish accent. There was a few heavy showers after this. I was glad I was wearing a Gore-Tex top and shorts. It meant I never felt cold, even in the worst of the weather. After 4 hours, Andrew turned up. This was a boost to my morale. Biking is easier when I know I'm not completely on my own. It's also easier once he handed me a packet of hula hoops and some more Pepsi. There was a very fast downhill section along Loch Broom. I hit 75 km an hour at one point, which then promptly changed to 10 km an hour and I reached the bottom of the hill. I turned and I was 6 miles into a headwind. It felt like I was cycling in treacle with a puncture. I'd not been looking forward to the Alpool Road as I thought it was going to be a headwind all the way along it until I reached Garve. I was actually wrong. There was a tailwind and the sun came out. I also got a boost as my brother told me that a friend of mine who was also doing the race was only 5 minutes ahead of me. I took off all my Gore-Tex stuff and raced off down the road. I was determined to catch and pass him, thinking that would give me a mental boost. At Garve, I turned into the headwind and I knew there was still 40 kilometres to go. The headwind was pretty brutal, but it wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was going to be, so that was a small positive. I got my head down and I battered through until the end. My aim for the bike was to average 25 km an hour to reach the end in less than 8 hours. I did manage that, just. I did it in 7 hours, 59 minutes. I headed out of T2. I had 17 kilometres in 2 hours 45 minutes to reach T2A. After T2A, the course splits into the high route and the low route, but the abysmal weather on the day meant that there was no chance the high route was going to be open, so all competitors were going to be on the low route. The low route is easier than the high route, but it's not easy. It's a very technical path, which is made harder, especially when the weather is bad. I had assumed the run from T2 to T2A was going to be easy. It wasn't. It was muddy with a lot of off-road sections through heather. I thought I could cruise around, but I had to work quite hard to make the transition in time. A few people behind me were walking as they thought they had plenty of time, but none of them made it before the cut-off. The weather at T2A was bleak, it was wet and windy. At this point you're supposed to have a medical check, but this for me just comprised someone asking, "Do you have a bag?" I said yes, and they went, "Okay then, get on with it." I changed into a full Rambler's outfit of waterproofs and a pole to help me from this point onwards. There's no time pressure to complete the race from this point, so I just decided I would just walk until the end. It was a long slog, and at times the weather was horrific, but I didn't feel tired at any point. After 30k, I opened my bag and treated myself to, you'll guess it, another can of Pepsi. I was hoping to do this section in 6 hours. I did in about 6 hours, 10 minutes, so I was happy with that. At the end of the race, a volunteer came up to me and said, "Congratulations, now hand over your GPS unit or you'll get a £25 fine." I think we need to work on the finish line etiquette a little bit more. It's not the same as finishing an Ironman where they go, "Ian, you are an Ironman." In this case, it's, "Ian, you'll get fined 25 quid if you don't hand that GPS unit over." Overall, I was happy with my race. I did enough to get around. Could I have done it faster? Of course. But do I feel the need to do it faster? No, not really. The experience you get from an event like this is the joy of working as a team with my brother and the experience on the day. Could I have had a better experience? No, it was great. I loved it. So there's no point in trying to do it again. The experience wouldn't be any better. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll add some links below to the blog. You'll find more information about the race, including a full kit guide to everything that I used. If you have any questions, then stick it in the comment below. I'll try to help. If you want to subscribe to a YouTube channel, then don't subscribe to mine. Subscribe to Fergus Crawley's instead. He's done a great Celtman video which shows you how a proper athlete completes the course.